Ezekiel chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. It says, "And he said unto me, Son of man, stand upon thy feet, and I will speak unto thee. And the Spirit entered into me, when he spake unto me, and set me upon my feet, that I heard him that spake unto me. And he said unto me, Son of man, I send thee to the children of Israel, to a rebellious nation that hath rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me, even unto this very day. For they are impudent children and stiff-hearted. I do send thee unto them, and thou shalt say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God. And they, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, for they are a rebellious house, yet shall know that there hath been a prophet among them. And thou, Son of man, be not afraid of them, neither be afraid of their words, though briars and thorns be with thee, and thou dost dwell among scorpions. Be not afraid of their words, nor be dismayed at their looks, though they be a rebellious house. And thou shalt speak my words unto them, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, for they are most rebellious. But thou, Son of man, hear what I say unto thee. Be not thou rebellious like that rebellious house. Open thy mouth, and eat that I give thee. And when I looked, behold, an hand was sent unto me, and lo, a roll of a book was therein. And he spread it before me, and it was written within and without, and there was written therein lamentations, and mourning, and woe. So, before we go into verse 1, we'll back up a little bit and try to get an understanding of this man Ezekiel and of the time and of the book. So, back in chapter 1, verse 1, it says, Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river of Chebar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. So, remember, this is after the people have been taken into captivity. Not only is this after the first captivity of when Jehoiakim was king, but this is the second captivity that was taken, it says in chapter 1, verse 2, in the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity. Jehoiachin, also known as Jeconiah, also called Coniah. Daniel would have been taken during Jehoiakim's reign. Ezekiel was taken about 8 years later during Jehoiachin's reign. So it says that the word of the Lord here in chapter 1, verse 3, came expressly unto Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar. So Ezekiel here is a priest, but he's not a priest. What does that mean? In the Old Testament, what do you need to be a priest? What do you need to do? You got to have a place to offer sacrifices. He's not at the temple. He can't function as a priest. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't have a job for God at this point. We can put it that way. I'm sure he did have some kind of labor that he had to do. This river Chebar is a canal that shoots off of the Euphrates River. It's down quite a few miles away from the actual city of Babylon proper. That was a workplace. It was a place for the growing of crops. It was a place for the building of buildings. It was a place for labor. So you can think of it almost like the Israelites in Egypt in the land of Goshen. They're in this place and they are there to work, and that's what they're doing. Very quickly, I'm going to read through Psalm 137. Psalm 137 says, By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept, when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For there they carried us away captive, required of us a song. And they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it even to the foundation thereof. O daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed, happy shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us. Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones. So, this is a psalm of the people when they were taken captive in Babylon. And they longed for Jerusalem. They longed to be back home. Now, as we will see as we get into chapter 2, these people are not a righteous people. These people are not people who have their hearts set and aimed at God and His ways. But you have to understand, they are a people that grew up in Jerusalem. They were there for generations upon generations upon generations. They have an actual connection to this place. God has implanted that in the nation to be connected to that place. Unlike any other, unlike the church, they have an actual real connection to this place. And so when they're taken away from it, it causes pain. It causes sorrow. It causes heartache. And so that is expressed there in Psalm 137. And in spite of all of that, in spite of all that sorrow, in spite of all that pain, in spite of the longing for God to take vengeance, they have no longing to correct their sin. They have no desire to turn toward Him. So we have the calling of Ezekiel the prophet. And that's what chapter 2 is about. Now, we see that of the major prophets, there's Jeremiah, there's Isaiah, there's Ezekiel, there's Daniel. Jeremiah is called prior to this captivity, and he's called to preach the captivity. He's called to preach judgment. He's called to preach, straighten up or you're going to be there. Straighten up or they're going to come get you. And then Isaiah, he is not one that preaches about this very much. He is the first to mention the Babylonian captivity because of the events that happened in the historical interlude of the book of Isaiah in chapters 36 through 39 with Hezekiah's follies. Ezekiel here is already in Babylon. He's already outside of the land. People have often called Jeremiah the prophet of the Father, Isaiah the prophet of the Son, and Ezekiel the prophet of the Spirit because of the content and the nature of their messages and also the way in which they're delivered. Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, so leave off Isaiah from that, just Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel, they were all contemporaries. They were all alive at the same time, prophesying to the people. We know that Daniel was aware of Jeremiah's prophecies. We don't know whether they ever met. We don't know, hardly any details about that. We know that Daniel and Ezekiel both, when they were taken captivity, were young men. Daniel, in particular, in his teenage years, probably would have been first taken, and then he was taken and brought to the imperial court. And so Ezekiel was a young priest, so he would have been in Jerusalem. Daniel from Jerusalem. They probably may have heard Jeremiah's prophecies at one point or another. It's possible that Daniel, being in the court, may have been able to make a journey down to the river Kibar every so often to visit the people. We don't know whether that occurred or not. We know he showed great care. We know he showed great concern for the people that were in captivity, but we don't know whether he actually was able to spend any time with them and get to know them. Ezekiel, as one that was taken into slave labor, probably would not have been able to use any authority to go visit Daniel in the palace. And then Jeremiah had remained in the land. He was not taken into the captivity. He was left with the elderly and the sick and the maimed, and basically the ones who would be useless for labor. Those were the ones that were left in the land. Jeremiah was left there with them. So while they were contemporaries, we don't know how much they interacted with one another, or if they interacted with one another at all. And then Ezekiel also falls into another set of 3 prophets, which is himself, Daniel, and John the Baptist. Does anybody know what is in common between Ezekiel and Daniel and John the Baptist? These were the 3 prophets of Israel who prophesied outside the land. Ezekiel from Babylon, Daniel from Babylon, and John was given the revelation while on the Isle of Patmos. Not only were these 3 given, not only were they prophesying outside of the land, outside the borders of Israel.
You said John or John the Baptist?
John the Baptist.
Oh.
John, not John the Baptist.
Okay.
I meant John the Apostle.
Okay.
Thank you. John, Ezekiel, and Daniel all prophesied outside the land. John was given the revelation. Ezekiel and Daniel were given their prophecies. All 3 of them were given an apocalypse. They all are apocalypse-type prophets. Now, an apocalypse doesn't necessarily just mean the end of the world, although that's what it has come to mean because of the book of Revelation. Revelation, that word comes from apocalypsis, which is our word for where we get the word apocalypse from. It means revelation. Because Revelation talks about the end times, people have taken the word apocalypse to mean the end of the world. Daniel, Ezekiel, and John all have prophecies that are apocalypse prophecies. They are revelations of the end. So Ezekiel's revelation, Ezekiel's prophecy, is highly geared toward the glory of God. And I believe that out of the 3, he sees the glory of God most clearly. And we'll see that. So we're about to dive into chapter 2 here, and I don't think we'll spend too much time on it. It's a quick and easily digestible chapter, I think. But before we do, we're going to look at an overall view of some of the major sections of the book. So in chapters 1 through 7, and I'll say at the outset of this, I have not completely read through and outlined the book of Ezekiel myself. I'm lifting this straight and directly from Dr. J. Vernon McGee's outline, and not only did he outline the book's major sections, but for the book of Ezekiel, he actually went through chapter by chapter and did an outline of each one. So if you're so inclined, I highly encourage you to look up Dr. McGee's outline on the book of Ezekiel. It's going to be very heavily involved in guiding our study through the book. So if you read through it and you get a decent understanding of it, you're going to be miles ahead on our study through Ezekiel. So you can find that at ttb.org. That's only 3 letters on either side of the dot, so that should be pretty easy to remember. And it's all free. So the first major division would be chapters 1 through 7, and it is focused on the glory of God and the commission of Ezekiel as a prophet. So that's chapters 1 through 7. Chapters 8 through 24 are focused on the glory of God and the complete captivity of the people who were taken from Jerusalem and the departure of the glory of God from the temple and from Jerusalem. Third section, chapters 25 through 32, talking about the glory of God and the judgment of nations. The fourth and final section is about the glory of God and the coming kingdom. And so that would be chapters 33 through 48. So you've got 1 to 7, 8 to 24, 25 to 32, and 33 to 48. And you'll notice that all of those are focused on glory. and another topic. But glory runs throughout the book. I hope that's evident from our study last week in chapter 1, where we see the wheels upon wheels and these four beasts, the four cherubim, and we see that all of this, they're coming, and then there's a throne above them, there's a man on the throne, and at the end of chapter 1, Ezekiel falls on his face, and then in chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "And he said unto me, Son of man, stand upon thy feet, and I will speak unto thee." All of what we read about in chapter 1 is the introduction of this man who speaks to Ezekiel. I believe this man is Jesus in his pre-incarnate form. But he's calling Ezekiel, he's giving him a commission. Now Ezekiel is a priest, but he's not a priest because he can't fulfill that role. And so he's being given a job, he's being given a duty. God says, you can't be a priest right now, well, I'll make you a prophet instead. And so he calls him Son of Man. Now I don't want to read too much into that because, as we know, that title is used by Jesus, and it's also used by Daniel a couple times. He's also called the Son of Man. But wrapped up in this title, which is used exactly 100 times in the book of Ezekiel, is all of the suffering and the humility and the exaltation in the life of Ezekiel. And that is mirrored in Daniel's life, in his suffering, his humility, and his exaltation. And it's mirrored in the life of Christ, in his suffering, in his humility, and then in his exaltation and his return to glory. So there's a whole lot of stuff that's wrapped up and packed into that title, but it's not that Ezekiel is Jesus because he's the Son of Man and Jesus is the Son of Man. Don't get confused on that. It's just a title. So we have this man who's in a foreign land. He was a priest in the temple. He saw the departure of the Shekinah glory of God from the temple. He was present for it. He saw it leave. And so, God he kept a special divine presence in Jerusalem. God is everywhere at all times, that is true. But Jerusalem is the place where he set his name. That was the place of the Ark of the Covenant. It was the place where he would appear once a year to the high priest. And when the people were taken captive, now the temple has not been destroyed as of yet when Ezekiel first starts prophesying. The city has not yet been destroyed. It's not been razed yet. That is to come. But the glory's already gone. It's no longer there. And the reason for that is because these are a rebellious people. They have sinned against God. So, in verse 1, Ezekiel's told to stand up, and then in verse 2, it says, "And the Spirit entered into me when he spake unto me, and set me upon my feet, that I heard him that spake unto me." So Ezekiel, he's called, and he's told to stand up, and I fully and 100% believe that he has not the physical ability. He is not able to do it. And so what happens? The Spirit enters into him when he spake unto me and set me upon my feet. Ezekiel is given a job, and not only is he given a job, he's given the power to do it. Because he doesn't have it himself. That should be a wake-up call for any Christian who's given a job to do that has in their mind, I can't do this, Lord. If God's giving you the job to do, he's going to give you the power to do it. It says in verse 3, "And he said unto me, Son of man, I send thee to the children of Israel, to a rebellious nation that hath rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me, even unto this very day." Now Ezekiel is a priest. He knows this. He's aware of the turning away, because he knows exactly what kinds of sacrifices are being brought into the temple as a priest. He knows whether people are bringing their best or not. He knows whether people have it in their hearts or not, because he interacts with them all the time, being in the temple. That probably would have been about 5 years before this event. Ezekiel's probably about 30 years old right now when he sees this vision of God. But he was old enough to remember. He's old enough to be aware of what was going on while they were still in Jerusalem. It says in verse 4, "For they are impudent children and stiff-hearted. I do send thee unto them, and thou shalt say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God." And he doesn't give him the rest of the message yet. He says, you're going to say to them, Thus saith the Lord. You go look and you go back at any prophet in the Old Testament. When they get ready to say something from God, they say, Thus saith the Lord. You see false prophets, and you see real prophets. Whenever they're just speaking, they don't say, Thus saith the Lord. And false prophets, there are times where they pretend to be prophesying, but they don't follow that. They don't say, this is what God says. They just start going. God says, you're going to say to them, Thus saith the Lord God. And it says in verse 5, And they, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, for they are a rebellious house, yet shall know that there hath been a prophet among them. He says, whether they listen to you or not, whether they hear you or whether they ignore you, they're going to know that you are a prophet. It says in verse 6, And thou, son of man, be not afraid of them, neither be afraid of their words. Although briars and thorns be with thee, and thou dost dwell among scorpions, be not afraid of their words, nor be dismayed at their looks, though they be a rebellious house. At this point, I'm already scared. At this point, if I'm Ezekiel, I'm running away. This is not an easy job. This is a very difficult job. Ezekiel, I'm sure that was probably what he wanted to do, but we see here that the Spirit had entered into him. He was given the power to handle this. He is called to speak to this is the people that even after being taken into captivity, after hearing the tearful prophecies of Jeremiah, after seeing everything he had to say come true, these are still a rebellious people. This first generation of the captivity, they were not a people that had their priorities straight. They were not a people that had their priorities toward God. And so, God says, you're going to be a prophet, and they may listen to you and they may not. Either way, he says, speak. It says in verse 7, And thou shalt speak my words unto them, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, for they are most rebellious. But thou, son of man, hear what I say unto thee. Be not thou rebellious, like that rebellious house. Open thy mouth and eat that I give thee. He says, the whole world doesn't matter if they don't listen to you. I'm going to give you words and you're going to say them. I'm going to give you a job and you're going to do it. That should ring especially true in our hearts today as Christians when you look at the state that the world is in today. Now, I don't think, as bad as it is right now, that it is as bad as it was when Ezekiel was prophesying. I think we still got a ways to go. I think we do. It's going to get there. It's on its way. You can see it. But, tribulation isn't here yet. This Babylonian captivity, this is a type of the tribulation. This is as bad as it's been for Israel. In their history as a nation, since coming out of Egypt and entering into the Promised Land, this is as bad as it has been. It's not that bad yet for us. It's not that bad yet for the world.